She had been looking for work for weeks. Every day felt the same, checking job listings, sending applications, and hoping for a call that rarely came. She knew how hard life could be when money was tight. Some days, it felt like no matter how much effort she put in, nothing changed. Still, she refused to give up. She reminded herself that work was work, and she had to take whatever she could get. When the call came about a cleaning job in a big house, she almost didn't believe it. She had seen houses like this on television, but never imagined she would step foot in one. The house was enormous, with tall windows that reflected the sunlight like mirrors, and a front garden so perfectly kept, it looked like a painting. Driving up to the gate, she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She had cleaned homes before, but nothing like this. When she rang the bell, a woman appeared at the door. She was polite and professional, explaining what the job would involve. She was asked to clean rooms, dust furniture, and take care of the floors. She was given gloves, a small supply of cleaning products, and instructions to be thorough but discreet. She nodded, trying to hide the nervousness that bubbled inside her. It was a big house, and she had to remind herself to stay focused. Money wasn't much, but it mattered. This job could cover rent and groceries for the month, maybe even leave a little extra for savings. She started with the living room. The first thing she noticed was how quiet the house was. It wasn't just the silence of an empty home. It was the calm, almost sacred kind of quiet. She felt like she was stepping into a different world. The furniture gleamed, polished and pristine. The carpets were thick and soft, and the air smelled faintly of something floral. Maybe a subtle fragrance the owners liked. She carefully moved around, wiping surfaces, dusting shelves, and making sure every corner looked neat. She worked slowly, paying attention to details, because she had learned over the years that how you did a job mattered more than how fast you did it. As she moved from room to room, she thought about the people who lived here. Who were they? Were they kind or strict? Did they notice the work of someone like her, or was it invisible to them? She knew she shouldn't think too much about it. Her job was to clean, and she intended to do it well. The kitchen came next, and it was as immaculate as the living room. Stainless steel surfaces shone under the lights, and everything had its place. She scrubbed the counters carefully, wiped down the cabinets, and arranged utensils neatly. Even in a house like this, she reminded herself, cleanliness was important. It reflected care and respect. Time passed faster than she realized. She lost herself in the rhythm of cleaning, the sweep of the mop across the floor, the dusting of shelves, the quiet satisfaction of seeing a room look perfect. The work was tiring, yes, but it was honest. She liked the feeling of accomplishment that came with finishing a task. Even small details like polishing the handles of a door or straightening the cushions on a chair gave her a sense of pride. She remembered her mother telling her, no matter what job you do it well. People notice more than you think. Those words echoed in her mind as she worked through the house. At one point, she entered the study. The room felt different from the rest of the house. It had bookshelves filled with heavy, leather-bound books. The desk in the center was large, made of dark wood, and covered with papers, folders, and envelopes. She felt a little intimidated by the room, like she was intruding into a private world. But she reminded herself that she was here to work, not to judge or explore. Carefully, she started dusting the shelves, making sure not to disturb anything. When she reached the desk, she noticed a pile of papers and envelopes. Some looked old, some newer, and they were stacked in a way that suggested they were important. She didn't want to move anything out of place. Slowly, she cleaned around them, placing her cloth gently on the surface without touching the documents too much. While she worked, she couldn't help but notice how organized everything was. Every book, every paper, every item seemed to have its place. She had worked in homes before, but never in a house so meticulously cared for. It made her wonder about the people who lived here, how they lived, what kind of lives they led. She shook her head slightly, reminding herself that she was just here to clean. Curiosity could wait. The room had to look perfect when she was done. By the time she moved to the next room, she realized she was starting to feel more comfortable. The initial nervousness had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. She knew what she was doing, and she took pride in her work. The bedrooms were next, each one decorated differently, each with its own atmosphere. She stripped the beds, changed the sheets, dusted the furniture, and vacuumed the carpets. Even small details like folding blankets neatly or arranging pillows made a difference. She worked quietly, enjoying the calmness of the house. It was a contrast to the noisy, busy streets she usually saw outside. Here, she felt like she could breathe. Lunch break came, and she took a moment to sit by one of the large windows. The sunlight streamed in, warming her face. She looked out over the garden, noticing the perfectly trimmed hedges and the flowers in full bloom. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to live here not as a guest, but as part of the household. Of course, she knew that wasn't her reality. She had work to do, and she had to stay focused. But even just imagining it made her smile. Life could be hard, but moments like this reminded her that small joys existed even in the most ordinary days. After lunch, she returned to the house and continued cleaning. She moved to the bathrooms, scrubbing sinks, mirrors, and tiles. She made sure the towels were neatly folded, the toiletries arranged, and the floors spotless. The smell of cleaning products mixed with the subtle fragrance of the house, creating a strangely comforting atmosphere. Even though her hands were tired, she kept going, determined to do a good job. She reminded herself that attention to detail mattered. The people who hired her expected nothing less. She was proud to deliver. As the afternoon passed, she began to feel a sense of rhythm. The house had its own pace, its own quiet order, and she adapted to it naturally. She moved from room to room with purpose, her mind focused on the task at hand. She thought about her own life, the struggles she faced, and the dreams she had. Cleaning houses wasn't glamorous, but it allowed her to survive, to keep moving forward. She hoped that one day she could find something more stable, something that offered security and the chance to build a future. For now, though, she took satisfaction in doing her work well. Then, she returned to the study. She felt a strange pull toward the desk she had dusted earlier. Something about the papers caught her eye again. She hadn't touched them much before, but now, curiosity got the better of her. She picked up one of the envelopes, careful not to crease it. On the front was an intricate signature, looping and elegant. She didn't recognize it, and she had no idea who it belonged to. She assumed it was just another piece of the household's business, something that mattered to the owners, but not to her. Still, she made sure to handle it gently. She placed it back exactly as it was, straightening the stack to make it look neat. The act felt almost reverent, though she didn't know why. The rest of the day passed in a blur of dusting, vacuuming, and polishing. By evening, the house looked spotless. She stepped back and admired her work, feeling a quiet pride. It wasn't just about cleaning. It was about respect for the space she was in, for the people who owned it, and for herself. She had done her best, and that mattered more than anything. As she gathered her supplies to leave, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. It had been just another day of work, but somehow it felt different. Something about the house, the study, and the papers lingered in her mind. She didn't know it yet, but this day would mark the beginning of something unexpected. Something that would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. She walked to the door, turned off the lights, and locked up. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the garden. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air on her face. She was tired, yes, but also satisfied. She had done her job well, and that was enough for now. As she walked away from the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house held secrets, and somehow she had already brushed against one without knowing it. But for now, she focused on the simple thought that she had worked hard, done well, and earned her pay. Tomorrow was another day, and life would continue, as it always did. Yet in the quiet of her mind, a small spark of curiosity had been lit a spark that would soon grow into something far greater than she could imagine. The next morning, she woke up early, her body sore from the previous day's work, but her mind buzzing with curiosity. She couldn't stop thinking about the envelope and the signature she had seen. It was strange how a simple act of cleaning could leave such a lingering feeling. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that she had no reason to be concerned about someone else's papers. Still, there was a part of her that wondered who the signature belonged to and why it seemed so important. She arrived at the mansion a little earlier than usual, hoping to get a head start on her work. The gates opened smoothly as she pushed them, the garden still quiet in the early light. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of flowers and freshly trimmed grass. She took a deep breath and tried to focus on the day ahead. Cleaning, she told herself, was just work, and it had to be done properly. Starting again in the living room, she went through the same motions as the day before, dusting, vacuuming, and arranging everything neatly. The rhythm of the work helped her feel calm, and her hands moved automatically over the surfaces, careful and precise. She found herself noticing more details this time, the subtle patterns in the carpets, the way the sunlight reflected off the furniture, the delicate carvings on the wood. Every piece of the house told a story, even if she didn't know what that story was. She liked imagining it, letting her mind wander for a few moments before returning to the task at hand. When she reached the study, she felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. The papers on the desk seemed to call to her in a way she didn't understand. She moved carefully, as if afraid that one wrong motion might disrupt something delicate. Her eyes scanned the envelopes again, lingering on the one with the signature. It was elegant and complicated, with loops and swirls that suggested importance. She hadn't touched it yesterday beyond arranging it neatly, but now, just looking at it, made her feel like she had glimpsed something significant, despite her curiosity. She knew she couldn't investigate further. It wasn't her place to snoop. She reminded herself that she was there to work, and her focus should remain on cleaning. Still, she found herself glancing at the desk more than once as she moved around the room, almost as if it held a secret that only she could sense. Dusting the shelves, she carefully avoided moving the papers, but took a mental note of their positions, making sure everything looked exactly as it should. Her thoughts wandered to the owner of the mansion. She didn't know him personally, but the house spoke volumes about who he might be. Everything was organized, precise, and cared for. She imagined someone meticulous, perhaps serious, someone who valued order and responsibility. She wondered if he noticed the people who worked in his home or if they were invisible to him, just another part of the background. She shook her head, trying not to think too much. Her role was simple: clean, do it well, leave no trace behind. Hours passed quickly as she moved from the study to the kitchen and then to the bedrooms. Each room had its own personality, and she treated each with the same attention to detail. In the kitchen, she cleaned the countertops, polished the appliances, and arranged utensils neatly. The bedrooms required changing linens, dusting surfaces, and vacuuming carpets. She found satisfaction in the small details, the way pillows were perfectly aligned, the way furniture looked polished and cared for. It was tiring work, but it was honest, and she took pride in it. During a short break, she sat by one of the windows, sipping water and looking out over the garden. The sunlight danced on the leaves, and she noticed a few birds hopping along the paths. It was peaceful, and for a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the quiet. Life outside could be chaotic, full of noise and stress, but here, in the stillness of the mansion, she felt a sense of calm she rarely experienced. She thought about her own life, the struggles she faced, and the dreams she had yet to achieve. She reminded herself that work like this, no matter how small it seemed, was a step toward something better. Returning to the study, she carefully picked up the envelope with the elegant signature again. Something about it seemed to pull her in, a quiet mystery that demanded attention. She held it in her hands for a moment, examining the curves of the signature, the way the ink had dried on the paper. She didn't know who it belonged to, but she felt a strange connection to it, as if she had brushed against an important moment in someone else's life without realizing it. She placed it back gently, straightening the stack to ensure it looked exactly as it had before. Her hands lingered over the desk, almost reverently, before she moved on to dust the shelves nearby. As she continued her work, she began to notice subtle details she hadn't seen before. A slight indentation on the desk where something had rested, a faint mark on the carpet that suggested a piece of furniture had been moved. The way light fell across the room at different times of the day. She realized that a house like this was not just about furniture and decorations. It was a reflection of the people who lived there. Every choice, every arrangement spoke of someone's taste, their habits, and their priorities. It made her feel small, in a way, but also connected, as if she was momentarily a part of this world that was so different from her own. By the afternoon, she was moving through the house with a sense of purpose and confidence. She had settled into the rhythm of the work, and the initial nervousness had faded completely. She focused on each task, making sure to do it well, because she knew that excellence in even the smallest jobs mattered. Her mind, however, kept drifting back to the envelope. She wondered who the signature belonged to and why it seemed so important. She tried not to dwell on it too much, reminding herself that she was not there to investigate, only to clean. Yet the thought refused to leave her, lingering in the back of her mind like a quiet question waiting for an answer. Later, she moved to the bathrooms, scrubbing sinks, mirrors, and tiles with care. She made sure the towels were neatly folded and that every surface gleamed. Even the smallest details mattered. She thought about how much pride the owners must take in their home, how much effort went into maintaining such perfection. It made her appreciate her own work even more. She wasn't just cleaning. She was preserving the beauty and order of the house, respecting the space as if it belonged to her in some small way. As the day wore on, she felt a growing sense of connection to the mansion. She had spent hours moving through its rooms, observing its details, and treating it with care. It was more than just a job. Now it felt like she was part of something larger, even if only temporarily. She realized that the work mattered not just for the paycheck, but for the act of caring itself. Attention to detail, thoughtfulness, and respect were qualities she valued, and she could see them reflected in the home she was cleaning. In the late afternoon, she returned once more to the study. Something made her pause as she approached the desk. She picked up the envelope again, feeling the weight of it in her hands. The signature seemed to hold a story she didn't yet know, a story that was about to unfold in ways she couldn't imagine. She placed it back carefully, making sure the papers were arranged exactly as they had been. The act felt significant. It's almost like a small but meaningful gesture that would ripple into something larger. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rooms. She finished her work with a sense of satisfaction, knowing she had done her best. The mansion looked pristine, each surface polished, each room in order. She gathered her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave. But she paused for a moment in the study, taking one last look at the papers and the signature. She had no idea that someone had been watching, that the envelope she had handled would soon catch the attention of its owner in a way that could change her life. As she stepped outside, the evening air was cool against her skin. She felt tired, yes, but also alive in a way that came from doing work with care and attention. She walked toward the gate, her mind full of quiet anticipation, unaware that the simple act of handling a piece of paper with care had set events into motion that neither she nor the mansion's owner could have predicted. Tomorrow would bring another day, and life would continue. But the subtle ripple of that moment, the touch of her hand on something precious, would begin to grow, leading to consequences she could never have imagined. In the calm of the evening, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that something important was quietly unfolding, and she would soon be a part of it. That evening, the mansion felt unusually quiet. The cleaning had been done, and she had left, yet the house seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something small but important had occurred earlier. Inside, the owner of the house had returned unexpectedly early from a long day of meetings and travel. He wasn't expecting anyone to still be inside, yet something made him glance toward the study. He paused, noticing the subtle signs that someone had been working diligently. There the dust disturbed, the surfaces polished, everything in order. His eyes landed on the stack of papers on the desk, and his expression changed slightly. Among the neatly arranged envelopes, one caught his attention immediately. He walked toward the desk, picking up the envelope with the elegant signature. It was the same signature he had been looking for, one that carried years of significance. He had feared it might be misplaced or mishandled, yet here it was, untouched except for the careful arrangement of the papers. Relief washed over him. Whoever had been in the room had treated the documents with care, even if they didn't understand their importance. He allowed himself a quiet smile, realizing that sometimes the smallest actions could have the biggest impact. Meanwhile, she was at home, unaware of what had just happened. She spent the evening thinking about the day, recalling the quiet of the mansion, the rhythm of the cleaning, and the strange pull she had felt toward the envelope. She didn't understand why it lingered in her thoughts so strongly, but she knew it felt important. She went through her usual routine, preparing a simple dinner, tidying her small apartment, and making a list of things to do tomorrow. Still, the image of the signature remained in her mind, looping over and over like a puzzle she couldn't solve. The next morning, she returned to the mansion. The early light filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm glow across the floors she would clean. She felt a sense of comfort as she stepped inside, familiar with the layout now, with the rhythm of the rooms and the quiet expectations that seemed to float in the air. She started in the living room, moving carefully, dusting and polishing with the same precision as always. Each movement was deliberate, as if the house itself had become part of her routine. Cleaning here was no longer just about labor. It was about respect, attention, and care. When she entered the study again, her heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the desk, at the stack of papers and the signature she had admired before. Something about the room felt different today, as if it was waiting for something to happen. She carefully dusted around the papers, taking extra care not to disturb the envelopes. Her hands moved slowly, almost reverently, as if she sensed that this room held secrets far beyond her understanding. She arranged the papers neatly, straightened the books on the shelves, and made sure every surface gleamed. Her mind wandered to thoughts of the owner again. Who was he really? What kind of person left such important documents in a room that anyone could enter? She imagined him as meticulous and disciplined, someone who valued honesty and care. She wondered if he ever noticed the people who worked in his house, or if they were invisible to him, just part of the background. She shook her head, returning her focus to the cleaning. Curiosity could wait. Work had to come first. Hours passed, and she moved through the house with practiced precision. The bedrooms were polished and neat, the kitchen sparkling, and even the bathrooms showed no trace of dust or dirt. She felt a quiet pride in her work, a sense of accomplishment that came from doing a job well. As she worked, she noticed subtle signs she hadn't before: the faint marks on the furniture from daily use, the slight unevenness of a rug, the soft sound of sunlight through the windows. The mansion was alive in a quiet way, and she felt connected to it. Even as a temporary visitor, late in the afternoon, she heard a soft noise behind her. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway, the owner of the mansion, observing her. For a moment, she froze, unsure if she had done something wrong. His expression was calm but focused, as if he were assessing not just her work, but her character. She felt a rush of nervousness and shifted slightly, her hand still holding a duster. She had expected privacy while working, yet here he was, watching. Instead of scolding her or questioning her, he took a careful step forward. His eyes fell on the envelope she had touched before, and he said nothing at first. He simply watched, studying the way she had handled the papers, the care with which she moved through the room. Her attention to detail and respect for the space were clear, even to someone who had been worried about the documents. The moment felt delicate, almost like a balance that could tip either way. Yet he remained silent, letting her actions speak. She finally noticed him and stepped back slightly, unsure how to react. He spoke, his voice calm and measured, explaining that the papers were of great importance, carrying both personal and legal weight. She listened, astonished that something she had thought was ordinary could be so significant. Her careful handling had preserved a critical document, preventing a potential disaster. Relief and pride mingled within her as she realized that her simple diligence had made a real difference. The owner studied her for a moment longer, then nodded as if reaching a decision. He appreciated honesty, attention to detail, and integrity, qualities he had observed in her during her work. Without hesitation, he offered words of thanks, sincere and thoughtful, that left her surprised and moved. She had never expected recognition of this kind, and it was overwhelming in the most positive way. She realized that even small, unseen actions could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways she hadn't imagined. For the rest of the day, she continued her work, but the atmosphere in the study had shifted. It was no longer just a room to be cleaned. It was a space where she had made a difference. She moved carefully, dusting and arranging, aware that her presence had been noticed and appreciated. The mansion itself seemed to hold a quiet acknowledgement of her care, as if it recognized her respect and diligence. As the evening approached, she finished the final rooms and gathered her supplies. She looked around the study one last time, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The envelope with the signature remained in place, untouched except for her careful adjustment, and she felt a strange sense of connection to it. She had done her best, treated the space with care, and unknowingly set events in motion that could change her life. Stepping outside, the air was cool and calm. She felt tired but fulfilled, knowing that her work had mattered in a way she had not anticipated. The mansion loomed quietly behind her, its secrets intact. But she sensed that the careful handling of the papers had not gone unnoticed. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, a feeling that something significant was about to unfold, and she was now part of it, whether she realized it or not. That night, she lay in bed, her mind replaying the day. The encounter with the owner lingered in her thoughts, the calm acknowledgement, unexpected appreciation, the quiet moment of connection. She thought about the papers, the signature, and the impact of small, careful actions. For the first time in a long while, she felt that her work, her care, and her integrity could lead to something greater than she had ever imagined. Sleep eventually came, but not before she realized that life sometimes moved quietly and unexpectedly, rewarding honesty and diligence in ways that could change everything. The next morning, she arrived at the mansion feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. The events of the previous day kept running through her mind, especially the way the owner had watched her in the study and the importance of the papers she had handled. She tried to shake off the nerves, reminding herself that her job was simply to clean. Yet there was a sense in the air, subtle tension that made her feel as if something was different today. She began her routine as usual, moving through the rooms carefully, dusting, polishing, and vacuuming. The house seemed quieter than ever, almost expectant, as if it was waiting for something to happen. Even the sunlight coming through the windows seemed sharper, illuminating the surfaces she cleaned with a golden glow. She worked steadily, aware of the rhythm of her movements and the satisfaction of seeing the house spotless. There was pride in the simple act of cleaning, a feeling that she was making a difference. Even if it was in small ways, when she reached the study, her heart beat a little faster. The desk with the envelopes and the elegant signature was waiting for her, as if nothing had changed. She moved carefully, arranging the papers neatly while keeping the signature envelope exactly where it had been. Something about the room felt alive today, almost like it was holding its breath. She wondered what might happen next. Would the owner speak to her again? Would something significant unfold? She didn't know, but the anticipation was palpable as she worked. She became more aware of the subtle details she hadn't noticed before. A faint scratch on the wooden desk, a small indentation in the carpet, a light pattern on the curtains. All of these little signs seemed to tell stories of their own. She imagined the people who had used this room, conversations that might have taken place, the decisions that had been made. The mansion was more than just a home. It was a witness to countless moments, both grand and ordinary. And now, somehow, she had become a part of that story, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. Later, as she moved through the bedrooms, she found herself thinking about the responsibility she carried without even realizing it. Cleaning wasn't just about making things look nice. It was about care, respect, and attention. Each brush of the duster, each sweep of the mop, was a reflection of her integrity. She realized that her actions, though small, had the power to affect others in ways she couldn't see. The envelope with the signature had reminded her of that, and she felt a quiet sense of purpose. This was more than a job, it was a lesson in mindfulness and responsibility. During a short break, she sat by one of the windows, sipping water and looking out at the garden. The sunlight made the flowers glow, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh grass and blossoms. She thought about her own life, her struggles, and the small victories she had won along the way. She reminded herself that every day was an opportunity to do something right, to make a difference, no matter how unnoticed it might seem. The mansion, with all its beauty and quiet order, seemed to reinforce that idea. Her work mattered, and she felt it deep in her bones. Returning to the study, she noticed movement in the corner of her eye. The owner of the mansion had entered quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, slightly tense, but he simply observed her work. His eyes fell on the envelope she had touched the day before, and he nodded slightly, acknowledging her care. There was a quiet respect in his gaze, an understanding that her actions had been thoughtful and precise. She felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Realizing that her honesty and diligence had been recognized without words, he spoke then, carefully explaining the significance of the papers and the signature. They were more than just documents. They were part of a larger matter that affected his family and business. Her careful handling had prevented a potential mistake or loss, and he wanted her to understand how important her actions had been. She listened, astonished that something she had thought of as simple cleaning could have such a meaningful impact. The realization left her humbled and inspired. It was a moment of awakening, a reminder that even the smallest acts of care could have profound consequences. For the rest of the day, she continued her work with renewed focus. The mansion no longer felt like just a place to clean. It felt like a space where her presence mattered. Every movement, every careful touch, became more intentional. She was aware that her actions were being noticed, not just by the owner, but by the house itself, and the sense of the quiet energy that seemed to surround her. She felt connected to the place in a way she hadn't before, part of a chain of responsibility and care that extended beyond herself. As evening approached, she finished the final rooms and gathered her supplies. She paused in the study, looking at the envelope and the papers one last time. There was a sense of completion, a feeling that her efforts had been meaningful. The owner watched her from the doorway, his expression calm but thoughtful. He seemed to recognize the dedication and integrity she had shown, qualities that were rare and valuable. She felt a mix of pride and humility, knowing that her work had made a difference in ways she couldn't fully measure. When she stepped outside, the cool evening air felt refreshing. She walked toward the gate, her mind replaying the events of the day. The quiet acknowledgement from the owner, the importance of the papers, and the sense of purpose she had felt while cleaning all blended together into a feeling of quiet satisfaction. She realized that her actions, no matter how small or unnoticed in the moment, could have real impact. It was a powerful lesson, one that she carried with her as she left the mansion and returned to her own life. That night, she lay in bed, reflecting on the day. The encounter with the owner, the careful handling of the envelope, and the sense of being part of something larger than herself all weighed on her mind. She understood that life often unfolded in quiet, unexpected ways, rewarding those who acted with care and integrity. She felt a growing sense of hope and confidence, knowing that her diligence and honesty could lead to opportunities she had never imagined. Sleep came slowly, filled with thoughts of possibility and the quiet knowledge that her life was on the cusp of change, all because she had treated her work with respect and attention. The following morning, she arrived at the mansion with a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite explain. The previous days had left her feeling a mixture of pride and curiosity, and today felt like it might hold answers or opportunities. She walked through the gates, the familiar sight of the garden and the grand house, bringing a sense of calm. She reminded herself to focus on her work, to maintain the care and attention that had been recognized before. Yet, there was a flutter of excitement in her chest, an awareness that something important might happen today. She began in the living room, moving with steady precision, dusting, polishing, and arranging the furniture with care. She noticed details she had overlooked before: the slight shimmer of sunlight on the polished wood, the soft reflection of the windows on the floors. Each action felt meaningful, and she took pride in the way the room looked when she finished. The act of cleaning, something she had done many times in many places, now carried a weight of significance. It wasn't just labor. It was an expression of responsibility and respect. When she entered the study, she felt a sense of quiet reverence. The desk, the stack of envelopes, and the signature she had admired before were all exactly as she had left them. She moved carefully, arranging the papers neatly and making sure every detail was in order. There was a tension in the air, subtle but noticeable, as if the room itself knew that the day could bring change. She wondered if the owner would speak to her again, or if some unexpected event would unfold. Her curiosity was strong, but she kept her focus on the work, letting the rhythm of cleaning guide her as she polished the shelves and straightened the books. Reflected on the past days, she had learned something important. Small, careful actions could have a profound impact. Handling the envelope with the signature, treating the papers with respect, performing her work diligently had already made a difference. She realized that her role, though simple, was part of a larger picture. The house, the documents, and the owner's recognition were all connected, and she felt honored to be a part of it. Suddenly, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned and saw the owner entering the room. There was no anger or tension in his expression, only a quiet observation. He approached the desk and picked up the envelope with the signature, examining it carefully. She felt her heart race. Would he question her? Would he scold her? She held her breath, unsure what to expect. But instead, he smiled, a small, approving smile that conveyed gratitude and respect. He placed the envelope back carefully, straightened the stack, and looked at her directly. He spoke, his voice calm but sincere. He explained how her careful handling of the documents had prevented a serious mistake. The signature on the envelope was critical, and had it been misplaced or mishandled, it could have caused significant problems. She listened, astonished that her simple actions had carried such weight. Her hands had simply moved papers with care, but in doing so, she had made a real difference in someone else's life. She felt a mix of humility and pride, understanding the quiet power of responsibility and attentiveness. Over the next hour, he continued to speak with her, sharing details of the documents, their significance, and the trust he placed in people who worked in his home. She realized that he valued qualities like honesty, diligence, and attention to detail far more than appearances or credentials. It was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. Integrity and care were noticed, even when they seemed invisible. She felt inspired, knowing that her simple dedication to her work had opened a door to recognition and trust. As the conversation ended, he made a decision that would change her life. He offered her a permanent position in the mansion, not just as a cleaner, but as someone entrusted with important responsibilities. She would be paid fairly and treated with respect, given opportunities to grow and learn. The offer was overwhelming. She had never imagined that her careful work, her integrity, and her attention to detail could lead to such a life-changing opportunity. Tears welled up in her eyes as she accepted, grateful beyond words. The days and weeks that followed were transformative. She learned to manage important documents, assist with household administration, and even help organize events for the family. Her confidence grew, and she found satisfaction in knowing that her work mattered in a larger context. The mansion, once intimidating, became a place of growth and learning, where her efforts were appreciated and her voice was valued. She realized that the small, honest actions she had taken, treating the papers with care, performing her tasks diligently, had built a foundation of trust that now supported a new chapter in her life. She also began to understand the subtle power of kindness and attentiveness. The owner's quiet observation, his recognition of her care, and his willingness to offer opportunity had a profound impact on her self-esteem and outlook. She realized that sometimes life rewarded patience, integrity, and diligence in ways that were unexpected but deeply meaningful. Her story was no longer just about cleaning. It was about growth, respect, and the transformative power of small, thoughtful actions. Months passed, and she became an indispensable part of the household. The mansion felt like a second home, a place where her efforts made a difference and her work was valued. She had grown in confidence, skill, and understanding, realizing that opportunities often came in unexpected forms. The envelope with the signature, once just a piece of paper she handled carefully, had become a symbol of trust, responsibility, and the quiet impact of diligence. She carried the lessons she had learned into every aspect of her life, knowing that respect, care, and integrity could open doors in ways she had never imagined. Looking back on the day she first touched the envelope, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. What had seemed like a simple act of cleaning had led to a life-changing opportunity, teaching her the importance of doing even small things with care and attention. She understood that life often unfolded in quiet, unexpected ways, rewarding those who acted with integrity and mindfulness. The mansion, the owner, and the documents had become a part of her story. A story of growth, trust, and the transformative power of honest work. As she continued her life in the mansion, she carried with her the understanding that every action mattered, no matter how small. The careful handling of the envelope had set off a chain of events that changed her life. But it was her consistent diligence, respect, and integrity that sustained her in her new role. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her efforts had been recognized and that she had contributed meaningfully to something larger than herself. Her journey from a temporary cleaner to a trusted, valued member of the household was a testament to the quiet power of honesty, care, and responsibility. The story of the envelope, the signature, and the small acts of careful work became a reminder for her that life often rewarded those who acted with integrity, even in ways they might not immediately see. She continued each day with focus, dedication, and mindfulness, knowing that the choices she made, no matter how small, had the power to shape her future. The mansion was no longer just a place to work. It was a place of growth, learning, and opportunity. And she understood, more deeply than ever, that the quiet, thoughtful actions we take can ripple outward, transforming lives in ways we cannot always predict.